Hi guys, just wanted to give you a heads up that this upcoming episode explores topics such as incest and sexual abuse. So this is a trigger warning. If that's not something you're prepared to listen to, go ahead and skip this episode. If you're okay with that, we'll see you in a bit. Welcome back.
Hi.
To another episode of Coven. This is a podcast where we cultivate our dream Coven roster, bringing to light the lost stories of enigmatic people throughout history whose fascinating lives echo the complex archetype of the witch. This is season 2, episode 3.
How's it going?
Good. Excited to be here.
Me too.
The world is crazy right now.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I guess I can say this. We're recording on December the 13th, Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
So listeners in the future, if you remember this time, you're aware of what's going on in the world. But we don't have to talk about that. Let's talk about some magic moments. I have a magic moment prepared. Okay. I did get to see Wicked, the movie that is very Pluto and Aquarius themed. Love it, and I grew up on Wicked, so it was really fun to see. I thought they did a really good job, but the whole time I was watching it, I was thinking about how Pluto had just entered Aquarius, and I couldn't help but wonder if the Wizard of Oz was Pluto Leo, if the Wizard of Oz came out during Pluto Leo. And I figured it might have, but I wasn't sure of the exact timeline. So when I went to look it up afterwards, not only was The Wizard of Oz released when Pluto was in Leo, but it was at 1 degree Leo.
Oh my
gosh. So exactly opposite where Pluto is now in Aquarius when Wicked came out.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
That was fun.
But is it?
Right. Is it crazy? No, it makes perfect sense. Of course it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my magic moment. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here. But it is very crazy right now in the world. That's for sure. But yeah, let's not talk about that.
Stressful times all around, but that's fine. Well, should we just go ahead and get right into it?
Let's get into it.
I'm excited to talk about this person.
Me too.
Yeah, we can go ahead and start with some birth chart analysis.
Okay. All right. Give it to me.
So this is the part of the show where Coco doesn't know the person that I'm bringing, that I'm introducing to the Coven today. So I'm going to give Coco the birth chart of this person, and Coco is going to do a blind analysis without knowing who this person is before we tell the story. So without further ado, here's the birth chart.
Exciting.
And for those of you who are listening and not watching, we'll have the chart up on the YouTube channel. But if you're just listening, I'll just say quick, this person is a Pisces sun, Capricorn moon, Libra rising with a Pisces Venus and a Libra Mars. And that's really all I'm going to say because I could say a lot, but what are your impressions?
Wow. The very first thing that I noticed was Neptune in Cancer right next to midheaven in the 10th house. So dreamy, fantasy, altered perceptions of reality, but having to do with that is out in the world. Mars in Libra, and is their birth time? Do you know their birth time?
This is an exact birth time. Birth certificate was on file and everything. So
I love that. Okay. So Mars in the first house, driven, or maybe a temper, or maybe both, maybe oscillating between the two. And maybe also issues with their body. And then, the Venus, Jupiter, Sun in this. I'm just kind of going to the things that I'm drawn to. Well, actually, I should say I was also looking at Pluto in the ninth house in Gemini, and some kind of transformation around either higher levels of education, philosophy, religion, or long distance travel. But something changed them with that, and communication, like short bursts of communication. But back to their sun in Pisces. So there's like, it seems like there's like a lot of maybe fantasy, dreams, maybe confusion as well, but also beauty in whatever it is that they are kind of with their vocation, especially with the trine from Jupiter to Neptune in the Jupiter in the sixth house, but it's at 0 degrees, so it's also something to do with lots of creativity. And the reason I say that is because Neptune and Pisces, both creative, and also the fifth house where Jupiter is right at 0 degrees.
It's actually the sixth house.
Yeah, sorry. I think I was saying, or what I was saying is between the fifth and the sixth house, Jupiter is at 0 degrees. And then, and also conjunct their sun. So, something about making things bigger, expanding, good fortune, and then beauty, because of Venus right there, and maybe the feminine, although there's something to do with transformation that is very pivotal in their lives because of the square to Pluto in the ninth house. And then back to the fifth house again. Sorry, I'm just kind of bouncing around the chart here. I apologize.
You're killing it, so per usual.
In the fifth house, Mercury and Saturn pretty much conjunct. Saturn at 3 degrees, Mercury at 6 degrees in Aquarius. So I'm an Aquarius moon, and my experience with Aquarius is actually kind of, I've heard it described as like cold, but also like other signs sometimes can be cold, but I've heard Aquarius described as like outer space, stone floating in outer space, cold, but also humanity. The saying that I've heard recently that I love about Aquarius is, and I can attest to this because my Aquarius moon, we love humanity, but we cannot stand humans. So there's some kind of structure around the communication. In the fun house, the fifth house, which is like also children, creativity, pleasure. So like some kind of structure around communication and pleasure. And then lastly, Uranus in Sagittarius in the third house, and then the moon at 0 degrees in Capricorn in the fourth house. So something to do maybe with the father. And it's
I was so hoping that you would make that connection.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like crying. I'm so excited.
Yeah, something to do with the father, especially because it's opposing Neptune in Cancer in the 10th house, which is also has to do with maybe mother as well. And then in the third house, chaos, disruption, but for freedom, but seeking the truth, and philosophy and religion again, but also opposing Neptune. And yeah, I also really like to talk about Chiron too, just something about needing to heal and to be able to talk to others about helping others based on whatever trauma they have. And I'm just looking at the squares too, also because Chiron is squaring Mars in the first house as well. So some kind of trauma that has to do with, again, drive maybe, or anger, or heating things up, speeding things along. I'm married to an Aries, so I know the Mars energy very well. But he never gets angry. He's just very driven and full of energy.
Disclaimer.
So I mean, yeah, let's.
Yeah.
I can't wait to. I can't wait to hear who it is.
That was amazing and so spot on. And her birth chart is so there's just so much about her birth chart that is so accurate to who she is. I mean, everybody, that's the case, but her chart.
There's also a lot going on.
Yeah. So
who is it?
Without further ado, this week I am welcoming writer, psychoanalyst, dedicated explorer of the shadow, and perhaps the most prolific diarist in modern literary history.
The most prolific what?
Diarist.
What's that?
Like diaries.
Oh.
Writing diaries. Anaïs Nin, into our Coven. Do you know who this is?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah, I'll keep my copy and you can keep your copy.
So wait, what is the name again?
Anaïs Nin.
Anaïs Nin. No, never heard.
Spelled Anaïs with like a little, what's that called over the I? The two dots.
I only know in Spanish, tilde, the little.
Is that the two dots?
Oh, the two dots. No, I don't know what that's called actually.
Well, I don't either. But she was born in France, but she is Cuban descent. So I don't know if that's a French name or I think actually her full name is much longer than this.
Anaïs is a French name.
Mm-hmm. Anaïs is a French name. Mm-hmm. Cool. Confirmed.
I know. Nothing.
Oh. Okay.
It's just really crazy, Jenna, how you and I are always on the same page.
Love. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
tell me about her. Tell me about her. I can't wait.
Okay. So this woman was such a trip to research, and I kept going back and forth if I wanted to continue and if I wanted to invite her into our Coven, if this was like the space for that, because I just went through so many emotions researching her because of the information that's out there about her. There's people who adore her and like sanctify, but make her into a saint. And then there's people who despise her and say that she's a monster.
Really?
Yeah. And there's not really a lot of in between. It's like one or the other. And yeah, there's like, even today, there's just like a lot of really conflicting information about her. And first of all, I think that is so accurate for midheaven, Neptune right on the midheaven. Yeah. It's like literally everything of who she is this mystery, is this illusion and this confusion. Yeah. So when you said that, I was like, yep, that's it. But yeah, so she's incredibly complex and confusing and enigmatic. Her story is one of artistic brilliance and passion and controversy. What she's mostly known for is her erotic writing. Okay. So the Mars, I think, is the passion. Okay. And in Libra, about relationships and that connection.
Because Venus rules her chart. Yeah.
Venus rules her chart, and then also with the passion that you were talking about with the fifth house with Saturn and Mercury being literally writing her life's work being about like finding structure around this passion.
Oh, yeah.
So she's known for her erotic writing, but that's like all of her writing was very beautiful and poetic and sensual. But honestly, it's like a sliver
Of who
from
she
what
was?
I've found of her work.
Oh.
Like it ended up being what she's known for, and that ended up being her most popular work. And she definitely like writes about it a lot. But from what I've read, and I've purchased 2 of her books now, and
How were they?
oh, I'm amazing. And she a beautiful writer. And I've not encountered the sex like that. Like, I don't know. It's interesting to me that that's what she's known for. She was definitely one of the first women to like talk about it so openly, and to write about it at all and to publish it at all. It's just an interesting reputation that she has. So that's what she's known for. Her diaries span 6 decades. And that's like her life's work. And they offer an intimate look into her life, into her relationships.
She was writing for 60 years.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, she started when she was 11 keeping diaries. she was writing her whole life. And we'll get into that, but she ended up compiling it, and that really was her life's work. But she's just constantly writing. That's just who she is a writer, and she turns everything into her writing. And the amount of work that she had that's still coming out to this day, like is it's just, there's just so much of it.
The Saturn and Mercury in the 5th house, and I didn't, I didn't connect the sexual aspect of it, even though that is there. Yeah.
You said something though about the 5th house and pleasure.
Yeah.
Which was hilarious.
Yeah.
So you kind of did.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Also, I've recently found, actually, in one of our classes recently, and we were analyzing some charts, I've recently connected Saturn to somebody's life work.
Oh.
Like your life's work, the thing that feels
Because
like
of
your
time.
life's work.
Yeah.
You get time and work
Oh,
can be found with the Saturn placement. So I found like these charts that we were analyzing in school.
We're Jenna and I are both of us getting our master's in philosophy and religion at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and we're lucky enough to be able to take classes from Becca Tarnas,
who's an incredible,
and Sean Kelly, and Jake Sherman.
Yeah, it feels really special to be able to learn from these people.
For real.
Yeah. And so in our archetypal, our Psyche and Cosmos course, been studying some charts, and it seemed that Saturn corresponded to some life's work. So,
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. But anyway, so her diaries, they look really honestly. Potentially. They look really honestly at her life, and they're quite shocking because of how revealing they are of her life. And so she was both a feminist icon and a woman whose sexual and emotional entanglements left her exposed to harsh criticism. So a big point of her life is her relationships. That's like where her controversy stems from. That's where her work stems from. I mean, Libra, right? And Venus and all of this Pisces energy. It's all about relationships for her.
Yes.
So let's get into her work and her life and her commitment to understanding her shadow self and how she navigated the complexities of love, shame, and desire.
This sounds like very spicy.
Very spicy. And also, I guess I should say trigger warning before I get into this part. This is before you get into her early life, there's definitely some like sexual assault content. So just...
Okay. Thank you for letting us know.
Trigger warning there. So... Anaïs was born February 21st, 1903, to Joaquin Nin, a Cuban-Spanish composer, and Rosa Cumel, a French Cuban classically trained singer is your person like next week.
I'm not going to say anything.
I'm getting a feeling that Coco and I picked a very similar person this time around. So she's born. Her mom is quite a bit older than her dad, and her mom is an heiress to like a fortune, and her dad is charming and at first wonderful, but then at home he's pretty violent and scary.
The father, that father issue, yeah.
And at first, and at times, her father adored her, but there's stories of sexual abuse happening with her at the hands of her father. When she was 9, he would take nude photos of her and the other children in what can only be interpreted as a highly erotic way, while also telling her she was ugly.
I'm sorry. It just...
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, it very, very clear, like intense, not only like physical sexual abuse going on there, but
Mental
that the emotional
yeah.
abuse of like, being adored by this person who's so charismatic and so charming, you know, and then being told by that same person that you're ugly and I'm sure much worse things. So clearly a very traumatic thing. Anyway, her mother's fortune ends up running out when she's about 11 years old, and the father leaves the family for good.
And that's when she started writing. Interesting.
Yeah, and her mother also at the time moves the family to the States. So she grew up mostly in France and Cuba, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, but they moved to New York when she's 11 without the father. And this was really traumatic for Anaïs to leave her father because although he was clearly awful, she's a child.
Right.
And there were also some really intense connections that they had. And I couldn't find exact information, but you can infer that there was probably more of like a sexual dynamic happening with him, especially because of things later that we'll get to.
Well, family members, I mean, you know, sexual assault from family members is extremely confusing because you know, they are supposed to be the one that you love, that is supposed to protect you and care for you. And if you don't know anything else, even, you know, if one is being abused by a family member, especially someone like your father, it can be extremely confusing.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when it's like such an intimate connection with your parent on one hand, and then this traumatic abuse.
And especially if you don't know anything else, you know, if you're, you know, in a sense, we all grow up in a vacuum with our parents. And so we, if that's all we know, then we don't know any different. That's why I get really irritated when, you know, I hear people say, you know, why didn't she call anybody? Why didn't she tell anybody?
How are you supposed to know how to stand up for yourself, or that there is another way of being?
And that actually, when I was looking at her chart, I just saw like a lot of confusion. So, yeah.
A lot of confusion. Yeah. So this is when she starts writing. The pain of losing her father. She starts writing letters to him that she never ends up sending, but letters like begging for his return, just begging. And I think some she does send, and he never responds. He just totally leaves their family forever.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah. And so she's pretty traumatized from this, and this is going to be something that stays with her entire life. This is going to be a pretty big like motivating factor behind most of her life, I would say, which is also interesting to me. The Capricorn moon opposite the Neptune in the midheaven.
Yeah.
And the moon pretty closely conjunct Uranus on the IC, like the roots. Also the cards. We did a card pull earlier, a little oracle card pull, and it was roots, the 4th house.
Oh yeah.
And fire, desire.
And Pisces.
So keep that in mind. Okay, so moving on from early life, she moves to New York, goes to high school, drops out of high school, meets Hugh Parker Geiler, or Hugo, who is a banker and a filmmaker, and falls in love and marries him. She's 20 years old, and they're super happy, super in love. And a year later, in 1924, they moved to Paris, back to where she was born. And you can imagine Paris in 1924, the Roaring 20s, and one of the epicenters of the Roaring 20s, just full of creative inspiration and visionaries and passionate people and progressive people thinking outside of the box, and just incredible artists at the time. So she begins her writing career here, supported by her husband. And for a while, they have a happy, stable marriage, and she's not really getting a ton of attention for her writing, but she's in all of these scenes and with all these people and having a lot of fun, it seems. And she becomes obsessed with art. She just wants to be submerged in a world of art at all times. She just wants to become art. Like, her entire life is art. And you can see this in her chart as well. And at the same time, she wants to support other artists because she just loves it so much. And she has the means because her husband is pretty well off at this point. So she
said he was a banker?
He's a banker. Yeah, he ended up becoming a filmmaker too, but he's a banker. So she starts supporting the work of other artists that she really admires, because artists are also poor at the time, and she's in a position where she's not. So she starts supporting other artists financially. And one of these is Henry Miller. You familiar with Henry Miller?
Henry Miller wrote The Tropic of Cancer,
Yes.
right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
She funded and edited.
Wow. Oh my gosh. All these women behind these famous
It's
men.
also largely believed that she could be a large influence for Tropic of Cancer.
Okay. I've never read Tropic of Cancer, and I don't know what it's about, but now I'm going to for sure.
Henry Miller is also a sexy writer, and their writing styles are quite similar, and so they clearly were inspired by one another. She, in the 1930s, falls absolutely in love with Henry Miller, and also his wife, June. So he's married.
All right.
And it just is like this incredibly passionate. So she loves her husband, Hugh, but there's not the passion there. There's not the spark there. It's just this really stable connection. But with Henry, he pushes her to explore her own sexual desires and to embrace her inner darkness. Miller represented both a muse and a mirror for Anaïs. His raw, unfiltered writing pushed her to explore her own sexual desires. And Miller, in turn, was inspired by her intelligence and her deep emotional insight.
Wow.
So they're just this really passionate duo. And of Henry.
Duo or trio?
Well, trio, but June was only in the picture for a little bit. Well, I don't know how long their marriage lasted, but it was, I think, only towards the beginning of that connection that it was like a trio. And actually her letters that she wrote about Henry and June ended up being published after she died, and it turned into like a film. I think like the first not rated film or something. She talks about Henry. It's a film called Henry and June. Yeah, but of Henry, she says, I have lived a whole lifetime in a single moment with Henry. He gave me the license to explore everything I had ever felt in the deepest corners of myself.
Wow.
And she says, he opened a door for me, and through it I walked into the vast and unknown world of sexual and emotional expression. His writing forced me to confront the brutal truths of my desires. And then of June, she says, I want to melt into you, to be so terribly close to you that my own self disappears.
Wow.
Which is such a Pisces thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're so right.
And then she also, of June, says, June was a shadow that loomed over me, a figure that I could not quite figure out, but one whose wild energy I both feared and admired.
So just in case there's anybody listening who doesn't really know that much about astrology, Pisces has a reputation for crossing boundaries, bleeding into each other. Just think water, think, no boundaries, no structure.
Yeah. And it's ruled by Neptune, which is just this archetype of...
And Jupiter.
Oh, true. And Jupiter.
Yeah.
But Neptune's this archetype of the whole one, like the soup of consciousness before there's any concept of separation. And so I want to melt into you, to be so terribly close to you that my own self disappears.
Yeah.
It's just Neptune and like
Pisces,
and Pisces in a sentence. So she meets Henry in June and has this explosive connection, which also coincidentally, this happens around the time of her Saturn return. I didn't print any like transit reports this time, but that makes sense to me. It's like this really big awakening for her. And this pushes her into psychoanalysis work. Because she gets really, this is also around the time that like Freud is getting a lot of attention, and the unconscious becomes a popular trendy thing for artists.
Also very Piscean and Neptunian.
Yes, very much. And so she's like exploring all of these like feelings that she's getting with Henry, and also just the way that Henry seems to exist is this very bold, he's kind of an asshole from what I've read. Like he's kind of a dick, and it really just admires him. He's so charming to her, and so it really awakens things in her, and she starts to try to understand herself. At the time in Paris, when she is funding all of this art, and she has this explosive relationship with Henry that I think is really emotionally taxing. Obviously, when you have something that intense and passionate, and he's married and she's married, it's going to be complicated. There's going to be a lot of drama. And she is pretty well known around the art communities. She's eccentric, kind, very, very, very... I don't know. I hesitate describing her in any way that I think she's often described as. So I was going to say very like sexual, like sensual, but I just don't know if that's how true that is, or if she was just like a woman who was very like aware of the sensual. I mean, she certainly has a lot in her chart that is very like sensually inclined. So I can imagine, and then maybe like seductive, and leaning into that seduction, that seductive quality that she has. But whatever the case, she's beautiful and enigmatic, and she's this eccentric personality who's helping to fund a lot of the art. But she's not being taken seriously as a writer. She's finding it really hard to find a publisher, because also she was working at the time when realistic fiction, and this is a quote from Alta Online, an article. She was working at a time when realistic fiction was all the rage, and masculine stars like Ernest Hemingway and John Steinbeck dominated the discourse. A woman writing about her sexual experiences and looking inward to her psyche was swimming against the trends. It's true. Like you have Hemingway who
swimming against the trends.
Yeah, right. Literal swimming.
But also, I mean, women have been oppressed for so long. It almost still feels like that even
swimming
today.
against. Yeah. Well, and we'll get into this because she is still swimming against trends. Because you have Hemingway who, and listen, A Movable Feast is one of my favorite books, and Hemingway is super annoying in a lot of ways, but I also love his writing. But it is very like minimalistic and very like to the point, and very like, so this happened today and this happened today, and he has some fun things, but it's not so drawn out and so eloquent in that way. And for her writing, it's like she takes a single emotion and like pulls it apart, like a true poet pulls apart a single emotion and writes about every single thing that she experiences with this one emotion. And that just wasn't super popular at the time. It's not really what people wanted. Yeah, so she's finding it hard to have her work taken seriously. She develops a close friendship with Henry Miller. Despite the affair and everything, they ended up remaining lifelong friends.
Oh.
And Lawrence Durrell, who I'm not actually familiar with, but the trio called themselves the Three Musketeers, and they would hang out all the time in Paris and meet regularly to discuss their work and psychology and everything. And of one of these interactions, they had slight friendly disagreement where both gentlemen were trying to explain to her what she needs to do to make her work recognized and published.
Mansplaining.
Right. And she writes later of this experience. She says, I want to be a part of that world, but I was not like them. I was not a man, and I felt that my writing was not as easily understood as theirs. And then in an interview, she said, it occurred to me that I had to take a path of my own, go my own way. I wanted to admit that the personal motivation and write in a personal way, very close to experience, and what I felt to be the difference between what a man has to say and what a woman has to say.
Good for her.
Yeah. She was just realizing, like, you know what? No, like what works for you is just not going to work for me. But her erotica writing begins in Paris, not as anything serious. Actually, she and Henry are approached by an anonymous buyer to write erotica for $1 a page. So it's just kind of an income source for them.
I wish I could write for $1 a page right now.
Right? And she never releases these in her lifetime, actually.
Wow.
Her actual erotica isn't released until after she dies. And that's what she's most known for. These books, Delta, Venus, and Little Birds. So, getting into her psychoanalysis, she learns of Freud and she seeks out psychotherapy to explore her incessant, troubling fantasies. So these fantasies that she has largely are with her father. These are sexual fantasies with her father. And she writes about them a lot, and she is super troubled by them. It doesn't seem like she likes them. Like, she goes to psychotherapy to understand this. She really wants to understand the shadow. And she becomes obsessed with the shadow. And she doesn't just want to, like, understand it. She thinks that it's something that needs to be explored and, like, brought into the light.
Wow.
So she clearly has some pretty interesting perspectives of this, because the shadow is typically something that people want to, keep hidden. It's not something that they want to talk about, let alone, like, embody.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at her Uranus. Or her Pluto in the ninth house. Just thinking about, like, how she's a writer and how it's in Gemini, and then digging deep, because Pluto is, like, basically excavating, trying to figure out what is going on, and then it's in Gemini, so it makes perfect sense that she would want to write about it. And then also in the ninth house, which is associated with Jupiter and Sagittarius, so seeking the truth, so trying to find out what this is all about.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's also forming that trine with her Mars and her North Node in Libra.
Yeah.
In the first house. Yeah. Yep. Makes a lot of sense. So she starts going to these sessions with Renee Allende and Allende, not sure if I'm saying his name right, and Otto Rank, who are quite famous psychoanalysts. I think friends of or students of Freud or something. Otto Rank becomes a pretty well-known psychoanalyst. And she's doing this mostly, it seems, according to her diaries, to also, just a side note, most of what we know of her comes from her diaries and from people who have analyzed her diaries and from interviews of people in her life according to her diaries. Like interviews of people in her life and being asked about things that happened in her diary, if that makes sense. So all of this is just according to, like, what she wrote down. And yeah, there's so much discourse around how much of it is true or not. But she mostly goes to these psychoanalysts to address these incestuous fantasies she has about her father. And this is around the time that she begins an alleged affair with her father, as recorded in her incest diaries.
Wow.
So this is a big moment of controversy with Anaïs. She supposedly sought out and found her father when she was in her 30s. And
wait, did he not know that she was his daughter?
Unclear.
Okay, I feel like I've heard this story before.
Yeah, this is her, like, I think most famous recent story. It's unclear. There's some accounts that say they were both aware and they were both like, whoa, this is crazy, that they'd been writing already and that they met and they were like, oh, we feel like strangers. Like, I feel like I don't know you. And then there's some accounts that she like seduced him.
Of course.
Yeah.
Her fault.
Yeah, right. That's like,
why would it ever be the man's fault?
Exactly. That's like the big thing is like, I think the most popular story goes that she found him, didn't tell him who she was, seduced him, and then abandoned him the way that he abandoned her.
She used her feminine,
exactly.
wily ways to...
Exactly. When in reality, it seems that it was probably more mutual, and he probably also had a really big part to play in this.
Of course.
And ultimately, the abandoning him was because her psychoanalyst was like, you need to leave this person before he leaves you again. Like, this isn't going to fix anything.
Yeah.
You need to stop this. Also, all of this is alleged because she also just wrote a lot about her shadow, and whether or not she actually did this or just wrote about it really in depth is unclear. There's some letters, I think, of her father that would suggest it did actually happen. But yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, wow. But the way that her psychoanalyst gets her to leave her father is he's like, you just need to direct these fantasies onto me, and then you'll get over your dad.
Oh my God.
But listen, the way that she is described as having an affair with her psychoanalyst, she had an affair with two of her psychoanalysts. And again, it's always framed, even today,
that she seduced
them and that they fell prey to her seduction and her charm.
Well, women need to be controlled, Jenna.
Right. My bad. I forgot. Yeah. And that's insane to me that even today, like, articles written this year will say that. And they're like, after doing more research and seeing how manipulative and
it's not really insane considering where we're at sociopolitically, right. To be honest.
You're right. Yeah, it's wild because it's like, clearly this is a person who is so incredibly traumatized and needs somebody who is safe, who can, like, even if she does have like some sexual compulsions, which I'm sure she did, you can't have that kind of trauma without having some dysregulated sexual energy. And even if she was full on trying to seduce these people, it's your responsibility as a professional to keep it professional, to not go there. And like, it's always going to be you with the power who has the responsibility.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway,
all three of those men had power. There was a power dynamic with her, and especially, I mean, even today, but during that time, women were. We're oppressed now too, but I would say even more so then.
Right.
So.
Yeah, this is the 1930s that this is happening, and even though she's in her 30s, she's a full-grown adult. Her dad is still her dad.
Yeah,
she's still traumatized, but. Anyway, so the point of psychotherapy and the point of her trying to have this affair with her dad is probably because she thinks that by doing this, she's going to heal this longing for closeness with him. Also, it's just confusing, especially if you have your first sexual experience with. I mean, it's a shadow side that most people would not explore, nor even if they would never admit it. Right. And so, to be honest, she sounds very brave to me. That is a really interesting way to spin that. And I like it because that, I think, is more my take too of, it is like, incest is one of those things that is such a shadow topic in our society that, for a good reason. Yeah. It should be. Oh, totally. But anything in the shadow that isn't actually like looked at remains in control of us. Like, all we're doing when we're not looking at it and we're not talking about it is allowing it to persist and to have a much bigger influence on our lives. Well, and for people to make judgments about it when they might not know what the fuck they're talking about. Right, exactly. And when there's like so much manipulation on the other end going into it. anyway, ultimately, it seemed like that was all a masochistic act on her part, reenacting her trauma. So it does end up breaking her obsession with her father. And she does, in fact, abandon him as he once abandoned her. So
working with the shadow does work? Well,
working with the shadow and maybe sleeping with her psychoanalyst also helped. Do not recommend. Do not condone. But it does kind of free her in some ways. She still will write about her dad, and she'll still enact these things for the rest of her life, but it seems this obsession goes away. So in 1939, the war is happening or beginning, getting pretty intense. And she and Hugo, her husband, move back to New York City. And she's super depressed in New York City, discouraged because continued lack of public recognition or literary success. And also New York is just a drag to her. She says, New York is the very opposite of Paris. People's last concern is with intimacy. No attention is given to friendship and its development. Nothing is done to soften the harshness of life itself.
No offense, New York.
She says, there's much talk about the world, about millions, groups, but no warmth between human beings. They persecute subjectivity, which is a sense of inner life. An individual's concern with growth and self-development is frowned upon. And that's important because this is largely the grounds upon which people call her a narcissist. Her obsession with growth and self-development and her obsession with her inner life. And I'm like, what artist is not that way?
Yeah.
Is that not like the whole point of art?
Yeah.
Is to like take your inner world and to put it out there and see like maybe this can help people.
Yeah.
So she doesn't like New York very much. It's bringing her down. But in New York, she does decide that she's going to buy her own printing press because she's not getting published. Oh. So she gets some funding and buys her own printing press. And she publishes 4 fiction novels and several essays and short stories. And in this time period, she talks about... there's just interviews of her talking about the struggles of a woman trying to remain a woman and yet to be an artist too. But she's just struggling to get any sort of recognition. In 1947, she meets this man, Rupert Pohl, in an elevator in an event that they're attending. She's 44 and he's 28. Oh. But they fall in love. They fall in love. And Rupert moves to San Francisco, actually, to attend Berkeley.
Hey!
I think forestry or something. Yeah. And she is just so in love, and he brings this passion and this fire that her husband doesn't. And she begins an affair with Rupert, and she convinces her husband, Hugo, that she needs an apartment in San Francisco for work. Wow. So she begins her bi-coastal life. She describes the balancing act of this relationship as a tightrope and experiences immense stress and guilt over it. And she actually ends up marrying Rupert while she's still married to Hugo.
Oh, wow.
So this is another point of controversy, is she's a bigamist.
How dare she? I mean, men never do shit like
men
that.
Never. But she's married to both. And while they both likely know that she's not monogamous, I don't think either of them knew that she is married to somebody else. Rupert knows of Hugo, but he doesn't know that she's married. He thinks that they got a divorce.
Oh, wow.
But Hugo's steady, committed, reliable, devoted. He was safe. He was home. But Rupert matched her passion. But he was a more unpredictable and chaotic presence. And she says, I felt as though I were walking on a tightrope, balancing 2 lives, 2 loves, but I was committed to both of them, each offering something different. I did not want to be confined by the boundaries of conventional love. I sought to create connections that honored my need for both freedom and intimacy. So again, she's honoring these dark parts of herself and trying to be as authentic to all of this in her. And she says, I was born under the sign of Pisces. I am a Pisces. Pisces ruled by Neptune, the planet of illusion, the sign of the actor. The design of it is 2 fishes, one going upstream, the other going downstream. And so Pisces is very dual. Whatever I felt I had to choose between, I always ended up taking them in, harmonizing them, infusing them into one. I never wanted to choose one against the other. I suppose this comes close to the Eastern concept of yin and yang. She also says, I never wished to manipulate anyone. What I sought was to explore the depths of the soul, even when the path was dangerous and unknown.
Wow.
And I believe that. Like, you could say that and, it spins it into, it makes her look honorable and brave. But I understand that. Yeah. And I don't know.
To being authentic.
Yeah, it comes at a cost.
Yeah,
it does. You can't be authentic, completely authentic and
not be judged.
Not be judged, but also not like at the expense of people in your life, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I see what you mean.
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm conflicted there too. But all of that to say, Rupert and her husband, they both stayed married to her until she died, and they were both loyal and devoted and loved her. And so,
well, that should say something about her.
Yeah, and I don't know if they ever officially like talked about it, but they definitely knew. And like Rupert has interviews after she dies of him saying like, yeah, I think we both knew, but we just like kept up this act because it worked and we loved each other. So in the 1960s, she has 2 husbands. She's still working hard. She ends up finding some publishing success in the 50s first. Her novel, A Spy in the House of Love, is published and received some attention, mostly for the sexual elements. Although it's mostly a psychoanalytic book, it is marketed as a sexual book, and so it sells for the first time. Of course. It tells the story of Sabina, a young woman in 1950s New York who actively pursues her sexual desires with multiple lovers while maintaining a marriage with her husband Alan, leading her to feel like a spy in her own life. Sounds kind of familiar. Yeah. But she says, my erotic writing is not just about sex. It's about the freedom of the soul, about breaking free from societal boundaries and exploring the hidden parts of ourselves. Finally, though, in 1966, after much encouragement from Rupert, she decides to release the first volume of her diaries. She says these diaries were never meant to be read by anyone. They were a space for me to unravel the tangled threads of my soul. But ultimately, she says, the day came when the risk of remaining in bud was more painful than the risk of blooming. And that's my favorite quote of hers. Yeah, I think it's so beautiful. That. So the timely release of volume 1 of her diaries coincides with this fierce second wave of feminism and sexual liberation, the 1960s, and it's a massive success. Although it is heavily edited. And people I don't know if this is public knowledge that it's edited. Oh. But there's a lot of information in there that like lists people by name and talks about these really personal experiences. So she's going to edit these quite a bit. But it leaves out any mention of her first husband, Hugo.
Poor Hugo.
Well, I think maybe he didn't want to be included, but also probably protective on her end because she's married to 2 people and she doesn't want people to know that. But she becomes a feminist icon of the 60s. She starts speaking at universities. She starts working with young writers. She's making television appearances. She's like massive feminine icon here. She's celebrated for her refusal to be defined and for her shameless exploration of her sexuality and her persistence to find literary success in a man's world. Because also her diaries, while they talk about everything, they do talk about her sexual affairs. So she talks about Henry Miller and June in these. Not in explicit detail yet, but they're in there. Of her incredibly personal accounts of people in her diaries, she says that she valued portraying people and trying to portray them so deeply that you went beyond judgment. You don't pass judgment as you portray. You try to find the motivation for everything they do, which means acceptance. So she really believed that her work was serving this greater purpose of that the exploration into the darkest parts of herself were necessary as a process of excavation for the collective psyche.
Excavation. Pluto.
Yeah, and she says, she just has so many amazing quotes, but she says the dream of every artist is really to contact the world and also to rebuild these bridges so that other people can realize they don't have to be isolated, that they don't have to be in what I call the solitary chamber of the neurotic. She really began to tap into something really powerful, understanding the essence of shadow work before that was even a recognized term, I believe. She believed that there were essential insights to be found in the realm of visions, dreams, fantasies, and desire. And in a time when Eastern spirituality was on the rise, this is really interesting to me. She says, we are working in a culture that is really the antithesis of what we are seeking. We have to create it for ourselves in the Western world, in Western terms. So she's saying, yeah, it's cool that we're all obsessed with Eastern spirituality, but what does that mean for the West? We have to create a Western sense of serenity, a peace with our psyche, a fusion of our conflicts, a fusion of our duality. We have to find our own way to create the serenity.
Wow.
She's like, you can talk about Eastern spirituality all day, but until we understand our own shadow.
Yeah. All that excavating that she did actually really made her profoundly insightful.
Yes, very much. So then comes her downfall. It begins when an ex-friend reviews her 4th volume of her diary in 1971 and points out that she was actually married to a wealthy businessman who wasn't mentioned earlier, and that she played at being a poor artist. And so she looked like a hypocrite because she looked like she was in Paris at the time of all these struggling artists, and she doesn't mention financially supporting these artists. She doesn't mention her husband, her financial support. So she looks like a hypocrite. People assume that she earned her freedom on her own, and though she never claimed this, now they saw that she'd long been supported by a husband. So as a feminist, people are like thinking she's like self-made, self-supported. And I get that, that can be discouraging, I guess.
Yeah, but also like, living in a man's world, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I know
Go
in the 20s, yeah. But yeah, so people didn't like it. At readings, audience members would confront her, roll their eyes when she spoke, and would boo. She said, I felt the novels were not understood, and I had created a wall between the world and myself, and I suffered very much from all of that, being a person very obsessed with relationships. Yes, Libra, Venus.
Yeah.
I never feared the truth of my diaries being exposed, but I knew the world would not understand the complexity of my desires. So she'd continue to release volumes of her diaries along with journals and essays until her death in 1977. So she's not like hated at this point, but she's definitely off the pedestal that they put her on. And people are like, oh, she's like full of shit. Like she's not even that. A lot of people like start to discredit her writing, saying it's not even that good. Like she's whatever, somebody to be forgotten. But she did have some fiercely loyal fans and supporters. Ultimately, she seemed to have achieved her lifelong goal of refusing to be defined, committing to her heart, and expressing her truth. She said, I like to feel that I have transcended my destiny. I want to be free of all social customs and moralities, to be able to create without limits and to live as I feel. And shortly before her death, she wrote, I only believe in fire. Fire was one of the cards we drew earlier. Life, fire. Being myself on fire, I set others on fire. Never death, fire and life. Le jeu.
Wow. My gosh.
Yeah. We're almost done. This is going to be a long one. But we are almost done, actually. So after she dies, this is where it gets even more complex. She's not even alive to defend herself. And in 1986, almost everyone who was associated with Nin and her diaries had passed, but her second husband, Rupert, decides, for some reason, that it's a good idea to release her unexpurgated diaries. So her unedited diaries. He's like, this is going to be great. I don't know what his motivation was for this. But these were far more incriminating, flawed, and provocative. For example, these diaries included her accounts of managing 2 secret marriages, maintaining all the lies in a little box called Box of Lies. She had to keep up between the two, as well as her accounts of her incestuous relationship with her father and her psychoanalyst, letters between her and Henry Miller, and more explicit, I think, and then a late-term abortion. And this one was really controversial because the late-term abortion had originally in her diaries been portrayed as a stillbirth. And when the unexpurgated diaries came out that it was a late-term abortion, she received criticism on both ends. It was either that she would have been a really powerful voice in Roe v. Wade era for people who had abortions and were celebrated, and she should have spoken out about it. Or people talk about how cold and emotionless her writing is around this late-term abortion. And it's unclear why she waited so long. I'm not sure exactly how long she waited, but it's definitely, I think the main thing I remember from reading about it was, I want to live in the present. I don't want to live with an extension of myself in the future.
Well, I mean, was she, I mean, at the time that she got the abortion, was that even like a thing that was accessible to women?
I know it was definitely like a private thing. She had several potential fathers around, like...
No, I mean, was it accessible for her to get an abortion when, early on? I mean, was it legal at the time? I guess what I'm asking.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But whatever the case.
Yeah.
It was definitely pretty dramatic. And people didn't like that. People had strong feelings.
I literally I was watching a woman who is still alive today talking about how before Roe v. Wade, she could not get an abortion because it was illegal.
But would it have been illegal in the States anywhere? Like because it would have been to the States' power? So like if she was in California, maybe it would have been different.
This artist was in California and she couldn't get an abortion.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people were not happy about that. And then... So her reputation after these unedited diaries come out tanks even further, but she still doesn't have like a ton of recognition or talk about her until 1995. This bitch.
What?
No, her name is Deidre Baer, and she's a very well-known, well-respected biographer. For whatever reason, she takes up interest in Anaïs Nin's diaries and her life, decides to write a biography about her. But instead of keeping it objective about the facts, it's seeping with moral judgment. And her discoveries about Anaïs, I'm just going to read this review from Amazon, because I haven't read the biography, but I have watched interviews of Deidre talking about her and read snippets of it. And so this review says... The Nin that emerges here is at best a spoiled, manipulative, vain, and egocentric little child in need of a good slap across the face. At worst, she's a monster capable of inhuman callousness and indifference. This image is derived partly from fact, true, but there's no objective organization of the facts, and these facts are largely unmitigated by humor or any attempt to probe Nin's deeper psychology. All Nin's acts are attributed to base motives, that she's a narcissist, she's selfish, and she's a manipulator. I've no doubt that Nin was guilty of these charges, but in writing a story of a woman like Anaïs Nin, so fascinated with human psychology and with the possibilities of life beyond moral demarcations, it is the duty of the biographer to probe deeper, to look beyond, even if they do not absolve Nin of her crimes. As a result, Nin does not really emerge in these pages. It seems more like a shopping list of her follies and cruelties rather than an exploration. And then they're like, I wonder why, because of the way that Baer seems to hate her so much. He's like, I wonder why this person decided to write a biography at all.
Because she's a woman, and that's not how women are supposed to act. Right.
And yeah. That's all I'll say about that. But Baer does not seem like the woman who is the most... she seems like she would have moral qualms about the way Anaïs lived her life. And so the witch hunt begins. After the release of this biography, and she's not even around to defend herself, her posthumous reputation is largely defined by it even today. She's recognized and pathologized as histrionic and narcissistic. And when critics address her sexual encounters with psychoanalysis or her father, it's always with the language that she seduced and charmed and manipulated them.
I'm sorry, just really fast I have to say, like, how many men authors had affairs and did all
much worse things. Also,
and they're glorified.
Right. There are things like she definitely had some pretty, I mean, we've talked about some of her bad things, but she also started an affair with a 17-year-old student, supposedly, when she was in her 40s. So that's a fan who wrote to her. That's not okay, right?
No, but men do it all the time.
Exactly. And it's you can look at these men like Henry Miller and Ernest Hemingway, who were awful, and Picasso, and still appreciate their work And it's so easy for us to do that with them, but with her, it has to be this
Nitpicked,
defining,
pulled apart.
Yeah, a good example of the way she's perceived now that I found online was a YouTube comment from one of these documentaries I watched that says, it was from a man, said, "I regret to have to agree that rather than being a free spirit, she probably met the criteria of a histrionic or attention-seeking personality disorder with a parallel narcissistic and borderline traits. She admitted she was not very honest and her relationship's not very healthy. Her incestuous relationship with her father was initiated by her as an adult and went on for 3 months." That's not true. It went on for 9 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's
not surprising.
That was from 2023.
Not surprising.
Blew my mind to read. And yeah, also was not surprised.
No.
But it's just so interesting to me. So ultimately what I found in Anaïs personally is a pioneer of the unconscious, someone fiercely committed to an exploration of her shadow, who was deeply loving and passionate. She had relationships last her whole life. This was not a narcissist. This is somebody who, even 20 years after her death, people who knew her, who are alive still, speak highly of her.
And her husband stayed with her.
And both husbands.
Yeah.
And honestly, she was just polyamorous, and that didn't exist back then.
Right. I was going to say that earlier.
Yeah. She's unusual and unique. She's traumatized and intelligent, powerful and alluring, threatening and externally free, yet bound by her love and burdened by guilt. She did live her life fully committed to her shadow self and her desires, but that doesn't mean it didn't come without the sense of guilt for hurting people that she cared about. Also, I left this out earlier, but her husband, Rupert, had said she never lied to her diaries. She only lied to protect the people that she cared about. Not that it makes it okay, but it is interesting.
Well, sometimes that's what has to happen.
Right. She just committed more to her life's work than she was to any person.
She was unapologetically committed to herself.
Right.
How dare she?
Right. And created so many fragmented versions of herself, and the world wasn't ready to understand. She also would dress up in costumes a lot, like everywhere. And that was another thing people pointed out as being like, see, she was fake and she was a narcissist. And she was like, I would be wearing this if no one was around. It's not because cameras are here. It's not because people are looking at me. I would be wandering my house in this costume because it's what I felt like that day.
Yeah, she's a Pisces.
Totally. And unfortunately, in doing this, she incriminated herself and blacklisted herself, largely misunderstood, because it's the shadow. And the whole idea behind the shadow is that we don't want to look at it. Right. So themes like incest, promiscuity, polyamory, abortion, and manipulation are not things that we want to think about. So it's easier to paint her as a monster and to leave her out of the story than it is to acknowledge these things in our own psyche.
Well, and because she's a woman.
Yes. And if you accept her as a valid part of society and maybe even as a genius artist, you have to accept that those things exist, like are acceptable, like they are things that exist. Not that they're acceptable, but...
To me, she sounds bold and fearless, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people have the guts to actually really look at their shadow self?
Right.
And not only look at it, but she analyzed it deep. Like she went in on
it. And so in true to close, in true Neptunian fashion, she defies all boundaries. She challenges our strict binary thinking of, is she good or is she bad? She's been a hot topic of controversy over the years, with people wanting to paint her as either wicked and evil, monstrous and demonic, or as a saint and a martyr for womanhood, a victim of the patriarch and a warrior for the feminine. But she's just both, and she challenges us to sit with that. Narcissism is a really hot topic. It's a buzzword that is our modern day monster in a lot of ways, because the worst thing that you can be is a narcissist, and yet we all are. This is our collective shadow. When someone outwardly expresses it, they are the worst imaginable creature. She's dynamic, she's complicated, and has so much depth, so much beauty, such a rich artistic perspective, and was simultaneously so troubled and flawed and shameful and wounded. We really want her to fit into a box of something, but she doesn't, and that was her goal, to transcend her destiny.
Right. She can't fit into a box because she's a Pisces.
Exactly. And like the Neptune on the midheaven, that's literally her entire legacy. So in the realm of misunderstood women, few have challenged our understanding of art, sexuality, and the human psyche quite like Anaïs Nin. An explorer of the unconscious, she was not just a writer, she was a portal, a rebellious spirit who dared to explore the shadowy landscapes that most of us are too afraid to even acknowledge. So this is why I've decided to welcome Anaïs Nin into our coven.
Welcome.
A long ass episode.
No, but that was amazing.
There's so much to talk about with her.
Yeah,
but
yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, I like to think Anaïs.
How do you picture her? How do you picture her in our coven?
Yeah, whenever I picture her, because she's described as this really like eccentric person, but in interviews with her and her writing and the fact that she's a Libra rising,
mm-hmm.
it feels really soft. Like, it feels really gentle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So eccentric maybe in the way that she likes to express, like maybe through clothes. And I feel like she's probably just sitting and like really listening and taking in. And like, I feel like she's somebody who would like really look you in the eye, you know, and like feel like you're being seen, like your soul is being seen. And that's probably what was so seductive about her, is that she was like really looking at your soul. And
she's present.
Yeah, she's present and really like seeing you. And when you're like really seeing somebody, that can be misunderstood for intimacy or a desire for intimacy.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway,
true.
so I think she would just be hanging out and listening and maybe writing some things, and
awesome.
I think she'd be really fun to talk to. I would love to talk to her.
Yeah. Well, welcome.
And that wraps up our episode 3.
All
Until
right.
next week. Do you have a hint
just
for
wait. No,
Okay.
because there's
Just
it's just too much. You're just gonna have to wait. So.
Amazing.
All right.
Bye.
See you later.